I've been trying to stretch paper properly onto a board for years, and I think, like most artists, I've had a lot of problems. What tends to happen is you have the paper on the board, you put the tape on it, and everything looks fine, but when you come back and the paper has dried and the tape has dried, you find that one side has lifted, or it's come off the paper, or it's come off the board. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It's very, very frustrating, and everyone's got techniques that they say work, but so far I've looked on YouTube and on art sites, and I haven't found anything that works satisfactorily for me. Some people use staples, and that kind of sort of works, but it's a huge pain in the neck putting the staples in and removing them. It's kind of messy, and it can damage the paper, and it also doesn't often work very well. You've got to put lots of staples in. So after a lot of time, a lot of experimenting and trying to figure out actually what was going wrong, I have a method now that is, as far as I can see, completely foolproof. I've done, 50, 100 boards like this, and I've never had a single problem. The key thing, really, there are two key parts to this. The first one is that you have to have a good board, and it has to be absorbent. So something like plywood is ideal, and you mustn't varnish the wood. You must leave it bare, because it has to be able to absorb the water from the tape. The second thing is that when you wet the paper, and before you put the tape on, you must remove any excess water, because otherwise what happens is that the water on the paper dissolves the gum or the glue on the tape, and the glue either sinks into the paper or it comes out onto the sides or back onto the board, but it doesn't stay on the paper. So that's why it lifts off the paper. So having a board that's absorbent means that the tape will stick to the board. Having a paper that's moist, damp but not wet means that the tape will stick to the paper. So these are the two essential things. That's probably all you need to know, but if you'd like to watch the rest of it, this video, I'll show you how I do it. A few little tricks that are quite useful, I think. So you need a few things. First of all, a towel, which will be used to dry the paper, to remove the excess water from the paper. The next thing you need are 2 sheets of plastic. You'll understand why in a minute. Obviously your paper. And what I do is to have a number of templates that I've cut out. For example, this is a 33 by 49.5 centimeter 3 by 2 template. And the reason I do this is firstly because it shows me where I can put the tape, not to go over the areas I'm going to paint. And the second thing is that once you've taped this down here, there's no guarantee that it's going to be done square. It's hard to do. So you may find that actually you've taped over a bit of where your painting you wanted your painting to be, or that you have difficulty in getting a square afterwards. So this makes it very easy. So just draw out the outline, and then when we tape down the the paper, we can make sure that we don't go over these lines, and this is our painting area. You're then going to need some brown tape, and you can get this tape from art stores or from most DIY stores, framing supplies. It's standard 2-inch brown tape. And you need water and a brush, and then a sponge in water to wet the tape. So now that we've got to this point, what I'm going to do is to wet the paper. And when you wet the paper, just check to make sure that it's wet all over, and you'll know that it is by seeing that it's all the wet areas are reflective. So if you look with light shining at an angle on the paper, you can easily see where the dry bits are, and you can make sure that the paper is well wet right through. Once you've done that, just flip it over and wet the other side. There's some use to the towel already, as you can see, because if I put too much water on, the towel will soak it up, so I don't end up with a wet floor. Because there's no need to put a huge amount of water in, just enough to wet it. Now the advantage of wetting the paper this way rather than in a bath of water is that it prevents the sizing that's in the paper from leaching out into the water. Sizing is a substance that is put into the paper to stop it from being too absorbent. If that leaches away, then the paper will become more like blotting paper, and you really don't want that, obviously. Doing it this way, we limit the amount of water a lot. There's nowhere for the sizing to go except on the paper. And then with the second sheet over the first, covering it like this, you can leave this here for as long as you want. The water's not going to go anywhere because it's stuck between the plastic. The sizing is not going to go anywhere because it's also between the paper and the plastic. So timing becomes much less important. Now, for the paper to stretch properly, you need to give it about at least minimum of 10 minutes, ideally 15 minutes or more. Typically I'd leave it for about half an hour doing it this way. You don't need to worry about these little bubbles, that's just water, or air or something. You can get rid of if you want, but it doesn't matter. Okay, so we leave that for 20 minutes or half an hour, and then I come back. Right, well, I've given this about half an hour, so I'm just going to take the top sheet of plastic off and put it aside. If I lift the paper and turn it over carefully, you can see that it's quite floppy, and that shows that it's thoroughly absorbed the water and it's stretched as much as it's going to. As you can see, it's completely flat on this. So I'm just going to take this and flip it over. It won't fall off because it's the water sticks it to the plastic, And then I'm just going to lift the plastic off and put it aside. Now we've got a very wet paper here, and so the second important thing I mentioned is to make sure that it's not too wet. So you just flip the towel over and pat it down to remove any excess water. Just like that. Now we can take that off. Let's make sure that there's no little bits of water left. So I'm going to remove the towel and put the paper back on the board here. Because the paper is not wet at this point, if you need to remove it, to reposition it, you can do that. If it was very wet, you'd find it to be sticking to the board. Also, you can see that there's no buckling or anything at the moment. It's completely flat, but it's also wet, damp, I mean, rather than wet. So at this point I need the tape, which is soaked in water, and my pre-cut tape. And what I do is I make sure that the sponge is damp, put it down onto the sponge, hold it like this with my fingers and put it through gently. And as you can see, the tape is fully wet. And put it down here so that about half the tape is going to be on the paper and half on the board. It doesn't have to be precise, but this is not a bad way of doing it. And just gently put it down. Don't press it down too hard. And I'll just do the same thing then, going around. Last piece. Oops. And the last piece. Like that. Once you've done that, if you take a piece of tissue paper and just gently go around the edges, go around the tape, what that'll do is it'll make sure that it's down everywhere, and also if there's any excess water, it'll remove it. But you shouldn't do it too hard, just gently though. If you press too hard, you may get rid of some of the glue off the tape. So this is it a few hours later. The paper has fully dried, and so has the tape. As you can see, it's fully stretched, flat, and the tape has stuck perfectly all around. I usually leave it overnight, but you know, if the drying conditions are good, 2 or 3 hours should be enough. One last thing I find useful at times is to use Scotch tape, magic tape. If I'm going to use a lot of water, and the way I use it is to put it slightly over, just coming up to the line like this. And I do this all around. And the advantage of this is that the tape is this tape is waterproof. It comes off quite easily, and it keeps the border nice and clean, and it also stops too much water getting onto the tape and potentially loosening it. I haven't had a problem actually with the tape getting loosened. Usually once it's down it needs a good long soak before it'll come loose, but still, this is an additional bit of security. So I put it all around, but typically, mainly, most importantly, on the bottom bit, if the board's going to be at an angle, because the water will be running down this way. So I hope that's been useful to you, and if it has, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. I'll be posting other videos to do with watercolor paper, and also possibly painting, watercolor painting and gouache painting, pastels and so on. And you may also wish to have a look at my digital watercolor painting tools, or digital painting tools that cover gouache, watercolor, pastels and charcoal on the website paintingdigitally.com or on the YouTube channels. Thank you very much for watching.